Last night's presidential debate was much more calm and controlled than the first.
Now it is a sprint to election day for President Donald Trump, Democratic nominee Joe Biden. David Dulio is here, political science professor and director of the Center for Civic Engagement at Oakland University. Back with us. And good morning to you, Dave. How are you?
Good, Jay. How are you?
It's great seeing you. So we'll start with this. You likely watched last night. We all did. We know that 1.9 million people have voted in the state of Michigan already. We still have an election day coming up. I mean, with the people left that still need to vote, anyone's minds changed last night?
Probably not. I think that and I'll say two things about that. One, the number of undecided or persuadable voters right now is really small. Most folks in Michigan, most folks in the United States have made their mind up about Donald Trump, either one way or the other. So I think most folks are set in their ways with who they're going to choose when they cast their ballot. And, you know, those that are up for grabs, they probably didn't watch last night. They probably watched the NFL game or did something with their family, right? Those voters tend to not be as engaged as maybe political junkies like you and me.
If you did watch and you are a political junkie, who would you say won that debate, if anyone? And talk a little bit about the difference between the first debate and last night's.
Sure. I guess I'd call last night a draw, if only because there were no real big knockout punches landed by either candidate. And the biggest contrast between last night and the first debate has got to be the interruptions, right? The tone of the debate, the quality of it was much higher last night than it was a couple weeks ago. And I'd also say too that President Trump had a really different approach last night than he did in the first debate, or maybe even ever on the debate stage. He was restrained, he was disciplined, and whether or not that makes a difference for voters is an open question.
You know, Joe Biden last night said a dark winter is coming. The president tends to lean more towards we have to open everything up and get kids in school, and this is something we deal with and wait for the vaccine. And you wonder, it's two very different approaches to this. And how do those approaches resonate with people?
Well, I think they're both playing to their base. You know, and again, this is an election that is frankly about the base. It's about voter turnout. As I mentioned, most folks have made up their mind about Donald Trump, whether they support him or don't. And it's incumbent on the campaigns now in the next 11 days to identify those voters and make sure that they turn out at the polls or cast an absentee ballot. So it's really less about persuading folks and more about activating folks. And I think that both of those messages are designed to do that by both candidates.
Speaking of COVID-19, we were just talking about that at the start of that. I do want to read something that Mr. Biden said, or the president said about Michigan. It seems to me like Michigan always comes up in the debates. He said Michigan is like a prison, and Governor Gretchen Whitmer's husband is the only one allowed to do anything. Why does Michigan come up in almost every presidential debate we see? We know it's a battleground state, but it must be on their radar, front and center.
Oh, it's absolutely on their radar, and it's important to both candidates' path to 270 electoral votes, right? That's why we see all the television ads that we do. That's why we see the candidates and their surrogates as many times as we do. So it really just speaks to the importance of Michigan in not only this presidential election, but likely presidential elections out into the future.
You know, I wonder sometimes, Dave, what was the turning point in history where, you know, politicians aren't always truthful? I mean, last night was a good example when the question of fracking came up. But, you know, you have Joe Biden saying, you know, what he said about fracking, and he's, I've never said that before. And he said, prove it to the president. And the president said, okay. And then the president goes and tweets a video of him, you know, basically saying he wants to do away with fracking several times on the video. It just seems like that the truth sometimes doesn't matter anymore.
I think that's a great point, Jay. And I think it's, again, you know, both candidates' supporters are going to hear what they want to hear.
Yeah.
and they're going to believe what they want to believe because it's their candidate telling them, right? And frankly, this is the thing that turns off. One of the things that turns off those moderate voters, independent voters that may not, again, be as engaged in the process. And when they hear this kind of thing or see the contradictory statements made by anybody, they kind of throw their hands up and say, see, that's what I don't like about all of this political stuff.
I want to ask you a question just because you're a political science professor. We saw, if you were watching Fox News, you know, I was switching back. I always like to watch the coverage beforehand to see what people are doing. If you're watching Fox News, you saw a surprise press conference from a former Hunter Biden associate that had a pretty big news, depending on whether you believe it or not. But this Bob Alinsky guy said that Joe Biden was directly involved with money coming in from China. Now, this is something that most networks have not covered, and now we heard it come up in the debate. Is it unusual to see things like this not be covered, or is this just an unusual year?
I think the answer to that, Amy, is both. It is certainly an unusual year, but I also think that it's pretty unusual to see a number of news organizations not even wanting to touch this. And it's surprising. It's a little it's a little curious to me.
Yeah, well, let's be honest. I mean, the transparency there is pretty obvious. I think it is. I mean, depending on who you watch, you can easily see what direction people are in. I don't know if it's been like that forever, but it certainly seems that way lately. And we try not to be that way, but we'll see. Just a short amount of time left to go. Dave, thanks so much for being with us.
Yeah, always great to talk to you.
You too.
And I'm sure we'll talk to you right around the election too.
We'll be back.